Good morning. I'm Lindsay Taft, Director of Communications at British International Investment, and welcome to this insight event on the circular economy. During what is London Climate Action Week, lots of events going on this week, so really grateful for you to join us today. And of course, everyone is warming up to the next COP, which will be taking place in Egypt at the end of this year. So, the circular economy. Our production and consumption of goods is one of the biggest contributors to the climate crisis. It generates nearly half of all greenhouse gases. We're using about 60% more resources than the planet can provide, and 90% of biodiversity loss is due to the extraction and the processing of natural resources. Sustaining the current level of consumption would require the resources of 2.3 planets by 2050 on our current growth trajectory. That's a really sobering assessment, but there is an opportunity to address this, and we do like to look at the opportunities and the bright side, and that is transitioning to a circular economy. Doing this will keep products and materials in use, eliminate waste, and reduce pollution. All sounds very simple when you say it like that. And in fact, developing and emerging countries already have large informal sectors practicing this already in areas such as electronic waste. So they're in a really strong position to take advantage of that kind of economy. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm delighted to be joined by a couple of really great speakers. So we'll be following our usual format. I'll be interviewing two very, very insightful speakers, and then we'll open things up for audience Q&A. So please think of your questions and put them in the chat for later on in the session. So I'm delighted, and I really am delighted to be joined by Lindsay Stradley, who is the co-founder and the executive director of Sanergy, which is a pioneering circular economy business that's providing safe sanitation services in Africa's low-income areas, urban areas. And put plainly, they're providing good, safe, green toilet facilities in areas where there's really low provision and particularly not really safe provision. The company was shortlisted as a finalist in the inaugural Earthshot Prize in the category of Build a Waste-Free World, and is one of the companies that we backed through an investment fund called Novastar. I'm also joined by Ellen Brooks, who is an executive in British International Investment's climate team. She'll be joining the chat later on. She's an expert in climate finance, clean technology, and the circular economy, and her work has been integral to the development and the implementation of our very own climate strategy, in which we're trying to align with the Paris Accords. And in 2019, she was selected as one of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Circular Economy Pioneers. So two really great speakers, but I'm going to start with Lindsay. Thank you very much for joining us today. You came up with the full circular idea for Sanergy in 2009 when you were at MIT in response to a task which sounds like an Earthshot task in and of itself. I think you were asked to develop a solution to a poverty challenge facing 1 billion people or more around the world. Tell us about that and how that led to the company today.
Yes, thank you, Lindsay, and thank you for having me in the conversation today. I'm delighted to be here. You got it exactly right. So the concept for Sanergy was born while my co-founders and I, David Auerbach and Anival Benini, were at MIT. And we drew on our different experiences working and living in cities and began designing ways for urban residents to more systematically access sanitation and safely manage the waste generated. I think the way you put it is indeed simple and straightforward. Exactly what we're trying to do. We launched the full circular economy model in 2011 in Nairobi, Kenya. And I think to explain it a little more, I break it into 3 key activities. So the first is, as you said, providing safe, sustainable sanitation services to residents in urban informal settlements. In Nairobi, now Kisumu, growing throughout the country and into other countries, really think of it end-to-end non-sewered sanitation. So how do you make sure that it's fully safely managed all the way through to treatment and reuse, which takes us then to the second part, which is implementing a circular economy model where we manufacture sustainable agricultural inputs from safe management of residual organics. So that's both sanitation waste, but a wide range of other organic waste streams as well, which all in different ways pose environmental and public health threats to emerging economies. So we collect all of those residual organics, coming from the urban environment, and convert them into insect protein through rearing black soldier fly larvae, into organic fertilizer through thermophilic co-composting, and biomass briquettes through compression. The insect protein is sold to livestock farmers and feed millers. The fertilizer is sold to small and large scale farmers to enhance soil health, and the briquettes to local industries, replacing the need for unsustainable fuels. So we, as we produce all of these, we operate the largest organics recycling plant in East Africa. So those are, so again, the sanitation, the first part, that reuse is obviously a core part of our operations. I think the third part I'd want to call it of our model is partnering with cities to develop and deliver safe sanitation and waste management for their urban residents. So we try to use a really systematic methodology to match cities' sanitation and waste management needs with suitable technology and service delivery models, and then offer clear guidance or partnership, operational partnership as needed on the steps that governments, funders, service providers, and technology developers can take to develop and implement integrated service delivery systems.
And
So
what
those are overall.
And what difference do you see each of those things making to the communities that you're interacting with?
Yeah, I think so on the sanitation side, just the provision of clean, really high quality sanitation facilities has led to an overall cleaner environment. So before you even get to the reuse and the fully circular approach, I can see this having been working in these communities for 11 years now. The sort of before and after is apparent to me, but I think it's even more apparent to the residents, a lot of the partners. So we operate mostly through a kind of through local operators, through franchisees, local landlords, and those local leaders are the people who can speak best about how now the communities that not only had fecal sludge, but other organic waste and inorganic solid waste, without any sort of safe management, it is visually different now, not to mention obviously different in terms of the actual safety and health, that health impacts of the communities that people are living in. Moving into the rest of the circular approach, the farmers, the feed millers, they're able to increase their yields, usually by about 30%, in both cases, whether that's for livestock rearing or for farming with our organic fertilizer, and to do that in really healthy, sustainable ways. And sustainable in this case, I think it's important to note, I also mean consistent. That they can get this, they can have access to high quality animal feed and high quality organic fertilizer on a consistent basis by really utilizing those inputs that are right there, right here with us in Kenya, as opposed to maybe the alternatives that are often imported, transported long distances, and are more subject to supply chains, which have further both environmental and economic consequences.
Yeah, you have a really sustainable source, don't you, of inputs. And so what is it that makes Sanergy's business model, you think, really different?
Yeah, so I think part of it is that we've really taken innovation as it's just core to what we do, and that we've done that in a really holistic way, applying nature's methods of waste conversion, to all these organic waste streams. Even then, building on nature's methods, our technologies that we've developed in-house have really robust, proven equipment and processes that we've layered to extract multiple products from each ton of waste. So I think that layering has been key. To highlight a couple of things I think that make that unique and successful. One, as we were just discussing, we've developed, we produce black soldier fly larvae, and we've developed proprietary farming techniques to replicate the natural black soldier fly, or BSF, life cycle. BSF larvae consume organic waste under controlled conditions. They efficiently convert nutrients in the waste into proteins and fats, and then the larvae become that high protein insect-based animal feed. So this is, again, taking an existing nature-based method and turning to it in very safe, controlled, consistent conditions. Then the next layer in that sort of innovation is on in the waste residue from the larvae growing process is converted into organic fertilizer through thermophilic composting. So that residue is then the input to the fertilizer. The residue can also be used to produce biomass briquettes. So again, really looking at a zero waste approach as you would find in nature, but in this case applied to manufacturing. And we're further able to adjust sort of the volumes or the proportion of the waste residue that's channeled toward fertilizer versus briquettes based on the market demand. So you can take a circular approach to being and still be very responsive and flexible to the economy and our local customers' needs, which will evolve over time.
Yeah, I think what really strikes me about Sanergy is that it's absolutely circular by design. It's completely integrated into how the entire business has developed. Where do you see the opportunity for other business models like that for the circular economy within the wider economy?
I mean, I think one key place that I think that overall circular economy needs to play, or the impact especially that it can have, is environmentally. That circular economy principles can play a big role in climate change mitigation through carbon capture. So we do that, but I think there are other ways that that can do that, and that's a core benefit that I think is sometimes underappreciated from a circular economy approach. So in our case, Sanergy's insect manufacturing process captures carbon from diverse organic waste streams that would otherwise contribute to greenhouse gas emissions, and we convert this waste into valuable products. So this may sound obvious, but obviously the inputs for reuse then never run out. So which in turn ensures that the outputs don't run out. So as I was saying, it's greater sustainability, consistency for our customers, and because it also allows for local production. You're producing things at the source of use, which not only enhances food security, but creates jobs and creates the inputs for local farmers. So to me, those are part of the keys in terms of the impact of our work, but I think apply more generally and taking a circular economy approach that that it is locally based and which creates jobs and the consistency for our customers. As you think about I do think it's again, another underutilized or underappreciated aspect is the creation of green jobs, and these are going to be essential for protecting the environment as well as enhancing sustainable and responsible production and consumption around the world, but very much including in emerging economies. So I think as we invest in economies around the world, we should make sure that the jobs that are being created really quite directly benefit the environment and the communities that they're serving.
And have you found that yourself as an employer in where you are, that this is something that's been embraced and understood by your employees locally?
Oh, yeah, very much, very much. We have about 600 employees kind of across that full value chain. And no matter which step they work on, so they can be on our sales team for our sanitation facilities, or on the treatment and reuse plant, they really appreciate that impact across this whole value chain. They understand that circularity of it, and that's part of what makes their role exciting. I think it is key, and it is a selling point as an employer, a circular economy employer, to be able to bring on staff that they could choose to do potentially a similar role. They could be a salesperson in a different company or work in a manufacturing role in a different company. But part of what's going to attract them, attract the best talent, is that impact that they're able to have, the innovative approach that we're taking, that they want to be part of.
Yeah, and we're definitely seeing that with younger generations, aren't we, coming through, really thinking about the impacts of the jobs that they do.
Yeah.
So let's go on to the Earthshot Prize, which it must be incredibly exciting. How did that come about?
Yes, it was very exciting. Um, we were connected to the Earthshot Prize originally by Darwin College of Cambridge University, which incidentally is the alma mater of the current High Commissioner to Kenya, who has been a really great ally for us in Kenya here. And the recognition through the Earthshot Prize has been just a really proud moment for Sanergy. I'm originally from the US, but I can tell you even there that all of so many of my family and friends have been following this so closely, and certainly our partners, around the world have been able to kind of see and appreciate their role in our growth and our success that much more by through that recognition. I'd say it's also been a game changer in catalyzing our growth itself just through the media attention alone. It's really nice to have a video of your work narrated by Prince William. It goes pretty far. And on the operations side, thanks to Earthshot, we have new partnerships that they have helped us create with Deloitte and with Arup, a large engineering firm that are helping us solve various technical challenges that we've been facing.
So there have been tangible outcomes from being involved in Earthshot.
Indeed, yeah. So obviously, there's a cash prize for some of the participants, but beyond that, they've really tried to develop an overall kind of network or sort of suite of support services, partners to kind of make the right introductions to really help at just that right moment each of the finalists get to the next step in their growth.
And I mean, you mentioned some of the partners that you're now working with to help you overcome some of those technical issues you have. What sort of challenges do businesses like yours face in setting up and growing?
Yes, many. I can't lie. There are always challenges in setting up and scaling businesses anywhere, but I think especially in maybe less developed markets, and I mean that both in terms of the economies, but also when you're creating new products and services, that where the customers aren't familiar and also the regulatory environment isn't familiar with what you're doing. So one big challenge that we face is indeed developing new products that new to markets, such as insect protein and organic fertilizer from residual organics. So there hadn't really been even an organic fertilizer market here in Kenya from any input. The feedstock wasn't the concern, but just organic fertilizer in general. And with those, we've seen that it takes time for there to be market adoption. And as I was saying, it takes time for there to be full regulatory support. So to overcome this, we do need a really robust enabling environment that's here in Kenya. But I think more generally, as I look around at other circular economy opportunities, we need a enabling environment that is really supportive in implementing successful businesses at scale. It costs a lot of money up front to set up some of these. Talking about manufacturing or tangible reuse. These aren't the like fintech or other maybe hot investment sectors that you may be able to kind of get up and running more quickly with less capital and kind of move further in a more flexible kind of regulatory space in other cases. So for governments, one of the, or rather I should say that we would love to have governments and investors really participate in supporting that. So for governments, this could be through incentives such as tax relief or rebate incentives for operational success toward some of the SDG impacts that they've signed up for. Including which could be done through manufacture and sale of regenerative products, as we do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always struck by when I speak to people who are building businesses in economies where there aren't regulator spaces, about how there is a first mover disadvantage, and I kind of think actually this is an entirely new process as well. were there any particular challenges coming from the fact that it wasn't just that it's a new process in Kenya, it's a new process potentially anywhere?
Yes, yeah, I think so. I think in both of those, two of our key products there, in the black soldier fly larvae for animal feed protein and the organic fertilizer, there were challenges at a few levels. As I said, it was both on the our customers, getting them just not so much to accept it. We actually didn't have issues with people. I think there's a misperception that people will have a hesitancy to take up products, sort of reuse products through the circular approach. That was not an issue. I think as long as you could prove to customers that there was that these are will help them increase their yields economically and safely, they're on board. But they did have to change some of their farming processes. So if you haven't previously used organic fertilizer, adopting that requires a change in or figuring out your application rates and changing some of your other inputs and processes as well. So it's just a higher touch kind of customer education process, which indeed it would, is now easier for us to sell, and for others as well to come in with additional organic fertilizers, which is great. But there is that investment that's really needed for that first mover, and then also on the actual creation of the processes themselves. So you saw a couple of challenges there. One is to then be authorized to sell locally. We have to be here in Kenya, for example, approved by the Kenya Bureau of Standards, and there are additional regulatory bodies. But the key, just like you'd find in the standards body, most countries around the world, they're looking at the product quality, and part of how they assess that is adherence to the production process that you're using. Understandably, there was no outlined production process or product quality guidelines. And so, sort of step one is work with them to write those, to figure out, to get those sort of enshrined in the regulation, but in a way that still allows flexibility for us and others after us to innovate and still be seen as, high quality. And then in other markets as well, we've seen that challenge. So for example, some of the farmers who initially took up our organic fertilizer then faced challenges, or at least uncertainty of whether they could export their food crops. There's large markets from East Africa for agricultural export to the UK and Europe. And they was not clear if this would be allowed because the regulations were either ambiguous or in some cases prohibited food made from fertilizer derived from human waste. And so you can then imagine, to kind of create those markets, there are all these layers of kind of barriers to support our customers and their customers in removing.
I think we'll return to that later. I'm going to ask Ellen to join us, because I'd also like to ask her about some of these systemic barriers too. So Ellen's joining us, as I mentioned, from our climate team. And before we get into the wider impact and the wider opportunities in the circular economy, Ellen, can you just tell us a little bit about the work that you do and how it's impacted on the strategy that we execute at BII?
Yes, no, I'm very happy to, and thank you so much for bringing me into the conversation, and also just what a pleasure to be virtually sat next to Lindsay from Sanergy, one of my absolute favourite businesses to talk about on the circular economy. So much better to be next to you than talking about the work that you do. So how has circular economy influenced our work at BII? I mean, we talk about this a lot, but we're really set up to invest for sustainable, inclusive and productive economic growth. And so circular economy is so exciting because it really offers us businesses and investment strategies that do achieve these three goals. And in the climate team, as you mentioned, and so there's a really strong climate link between the circular economy and climate action, particularly mitigation. So you mentioned in your introduction, Lindsay, that we think about climate, we think about wind farms, we think about solar on-grid and off-grid, but actually so much emissions come from the material economy, the way that we produce food, the way that we produce clothes, cars, the products that we sell. And the Ellen MacArthur Foundation actually estimates that 45% of greenhouse gas emissions come from a circular, or come from a linear extractive model of making these goods. And so really circular economy offers solutions to tackle that decarbonisation challenge. And really it's that element of sustainability alongside inclusive and productivity that we're focused on at BII. And so that's really affected the way that we work across multiple teams in a few different ways, which I'm happy to highlight. So I'm fortunate that there are many people at BII working on circular economy. We're primarily looking at this to drive part of our origination strategy. So we're focused on originating circular economy investments such as Sanergy across a number of sectors. So we're looking at recycling infrastructure, plastics, packaging, and regenerative agriculture. You can dig into that types of circular economy in a bit more detail later. And then we've got an expert ESGI team who are working with businesses to help them improve the way that they manage waste. We've got a brilliant waste guidance note. It's circular economy is part of our areas of interest and emerging areas in our policy of responsible investment. And there's some brilliant work that you can read more about on our website that we've done, particularly focusing on e-waste in the off-grid solar sector, because actually the off-grid solar sector, when those products come to the end of life, there's interesting challenges about returning them and factoring in repair and sort of closing that loop. So yeah, I would encourage everyone to have a look at that on our website as well. So in summary, huge important area of interest for BII and something that multiple colleagues across the organisation are working on.
And it's nice to hear you talk a little bit about the breadth of how you're and we are thinking about it. You know, as someone who's not an expert in this area, when I think of circular economy, like many other people, I think about waste management, but it's more than that, isn't it? What are the opportunities around how the circular economy could work more broadly? We've heard from Lindsay on how she's sort of integrated through an entire product strategy out into another area. What else is there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because I think circular economy is sometimes used as this real buzzword. What does that mean in practice? How can we bring that to life? So the way that I like to think about it is think about our linear economy at the moment, which most of the global economic system is driven by. So it's based on taking raw materials, often out of the ground, making them into a product which has a certain lifespan, and then that product becomes waste, and usually, you know, ends up in something like landfill. And this is driving a huge global waste crisis, which is not only impacting the environment. We always hear, but you know, by 2050 there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish. Horrific fact. I had to bring it to the discussion today. But not only is it driving huge environmental impacts, but it's also driving quality of life impacts, health impacts. So it really is affecting how we achieve all of the SDGs. And so the circular economy is a complete contrast to this. And there's two types of circular economy cycles that you can think about. One is sort of the technical cycle, which is built on hard materials, and the other is the organic cycle. Starting with the organic cycle, I think, you know, you can't think of a better example than Sanergy, and Lindsay's just really brought that to life in a brilliant way about taking organic inputs, and rather than that becoming waste and the potential CO2 emissions that are associated with that actually becomes something productive and useful that can be used again. And so you see that closing the loop, or that cycling of the organic cycle. Contrast that with the technical cycle, which is the same principles. We're just thinking about things like plastics and metals here. That's really about firstly designing a product so that it is less wasteful by design. So maybe it can be more easily recycled, or it has a longer lifespan, something like that. Then keeping the product in use for as long as possible, thinking about repair. Then when that product does finally come to the end of its useful lifetime and it couldn't be reused, then thinking about the end of life. So that should ideally be recycling. It shouldn't end up in sort of waste to energy or landfill. And therefore the metals or the plastics or the hard materials that were in that product could be extracted by recycling and used again for the manufacture of another product. So again, you're sort of closing that loop. So that's really what the circular economy means conceptually. And I think crucially for us as an investor, this means that not only is circular economy a topic for when we're looking at waste management infrastructure, it's actually a theme and a strategy and a lens that we should be applying to investments in all different sectors.
I mean, you've just mentioned investment. Where does investment come in? Where's it needed on this?
So I think investment is urgently needed to support and scale all these different types of circular economy strategies that I mentioned. And the good news is that there are so many businesses emerging that offer great investable opportunities to do so. I think what's also really exciting from an investment perspective is that someone like Sanergy is taking waste, which is a sort of input stream that we don't value societally, but we also don't put that much of a price on often, and upcycling that into a product which can actually generate, really good revenue streams. And so it's a really clever business model. Not only does it have these great environmental impacts, but it's just clever from sort of a margins and returns point of view. So investment's urgently needed, and I think the opportunity there is really exciting.
And I mean, Lindsay, can I ask you the same question? Where do you see the investment gaps and opportunities in the circular economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first of all, that was great. I appreciate all that, your wisdom there and your depth of experience throughout the circular economy. Yeah, I do think that the circular economy, not only results in better and more efficient use of resources, as you were just Ellen was saying, but it does, I think, have the potential to unlock, as in our research, up to $4.5 trillion of value over the next decade. And I do think it's where the future of business lies, that circular economy is, and hence it's really critical to shift the sort of investment focus there. And I think particularly for DFIs and other larger investment players, I think it's really key for them to kind of be those first movers, to build the necessary, to put that focus on building the necessary economic and environmental resilience for fast-growing cities and emerging economies. That shifting the funding to things that are circular by nature in these spaces is key, so that those economies are kind of developing right in the first place. You think about in sanitation in our case, and in waste management, sort of leapfrogging some of the previous approaches, processes, technologies that have been used in more developed economies, cities, especially over the last 100+ years. And so I think if we can invest now in businesses that are coming up in emerging economies and circular economy, it can kind of skip over, we can leapfrog those impacts at the beginning.
And do you see that there's a particular role or space for development finance institutions as opposed to other investors at this point, or at certain points in a business's journey?
Yeah, I do. I think that development finance institutions really play a particularly critical role in attracting private investment into the circular economy. This is because for most investors, the new circular economy innovations and business models may still be considered high risk, especially in emerging markets, where they may have less experience or already have potentially or already seen as higher risk. And so DFIs coming in early and with larger, more supportive investments really helps to build a proof of concept to a broader kind of investment sector.
Thank you. And in terms of, you talked a little bit about the barriers, and one of the things that really interested me is that you said that with some of your customers, there isn't a barrier there in terms of their own views on using reused products. Where do you see the barriers in the take-up of the circular economy? Is it with customers? Is it with regulators? Is it with businesses just not changing their views?
Yeah, I think that it is more with like the medium to long term. It's more on the regulatory front. I mean, any new product will face barriers to uptake, but I don't think that those are particularly specific to circular economy products. So I think the challenges in circular economy is that often you've changed a process in a way that it kind of isn't thought about, isn't contemplated in regulatory frameworks. And as you noted, Lindsay, can be more expensive because of it, right? Because you have to, in our case, for example, we had to invest quite a lot of time and money in helping develop the regulations that, that then we are assessed by, or, that we adhere to. So I think, that a couple of things that I would want to see governments do better. I mentioned potentially tax exemptions on or subsidies, and sort of smart subsidies for the production and sale of regenerative products, which I think can spur that uptake, kind of get a kickstart. And then also, that latter part around the regulatory frameworks, I think while shifting kind of national policies and regulatory frameworks to include circular economy and its principles, in doing that, it's great in initiating cities' overall transition. But there still needs to be a lot more effort in providing kind of clear action and accountability plans. So as cities, to kind of be a little bit more clear, as cities commit, or governments, national governments commit on behalf of their cities to making some of these changes, I think at this point they're not very well enforced or followed through on. And so I think that we do see that as, if not a barrier, it's sort of at this point a kind of maybe not empty promise, but one that hasn't yet followed through on. And so I think seeing governments do that will kind of, it is a block at the moment, and bringing investors, actually, to go back to your earlier question, bringing investors, but especially the larger DFIs, I think can also add a little bit more leverage to getting governments to actually follow through on some of those commitments.
And Ellen, same question to you: are you seeing similar sorts of the barriers in a similar sort of space, or elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think Lindsay really well articulated it. I think that there are barriers. Circular economy is quite disruptive, especially if you think about it in terms of the organic and the technical cycle and the changes that we need across different areas of the economy, and different circular economy models will have sort of different barriers. So if we think about product to service shift, which is actually moving from ownership to rental. So thinking about, rather than buying a tractor as a farmer, I'm going to rent it for the period that I need it. That might be a sort of a mindset shift for the customer. It might be a mindset shift for the investor who doesn't have similar models to benchmark that against. But it also offers great advantage, greater use of that tractor, for example, perhaps a lower price point, which would be particularly good for development gains, and getting more farmers to have access to the hard equipment that they need. So this products to service shift, I think, for me, is the part of the circular economy that probably is the most disruptive. And so we do need investors and governments to take measures to incentivize the acceleration of a circular economy. And it's urgent, right? We're in a climate crisis. We need action on the circular economy now. And so to answer your question, Lindsay, then what would that look like? What would that action need? I think as an investor, you need sort of two things. One is that the risk of operating a linear business model is properly priced into the way that we appraise businesses, and that can be supported through legislation which sort of penalizes the production of waste. So that could be things like single-use plastic bans, or it could be things like extended producer responsibility legislation that national governments can do to highlight and legislate against the transition risk of linear models. And I am not the expert in EPR legislation, but there is this amazing map produced by Chatham House, which shows these kind of circular economy legislations in every country of the world. I think you can find it on circulareconomy.earth, but what's amazing about that is you can see it across all markets. So it's not just the EU which has this kind of legislation. There's different legislations popping up in nearly every market that BII invests in. So this definitely is something that we as an emerging market investor need to be cognizant of. So the first is sort of that risk side of the linear economy. I think the second thing that we need as investors looking to deliver more climate finance is actually strong, credible definitions of what green investment in the circular economy looks like. And lots of people are working on green taxonomies at the moment, the EU taxonomy being the first example where circular economy, or that I came across, where circular economy was so mainstreamed. But we know that BIS markets are also working on their own green taxonomies, and hopefully circular economy is going to be well defined in those. And so investors like BII looking to support credible circular economy businesses now have a definition of what this green or circular finance looks like. And that's hugely helpful in helping us track and increase the flow of capital into the solution space. So for me, it's like this risk and opportunity side, which investors need to be thinking about, and we can be supported on to do that through government intervention.
Yeah, and it always strikes me how with lots of these things, it's about lining the incentives up, isn't it? So that making sure that the push and the pull is in the right direction, and it all starts to make sense for everyone in the value chain. Before I move, I'm going to move to the audience Q&A very shortly. Before I do, just quickly, COP27 will be in Egypt later this year, less than 6 months away. This is arguably a starting point for the action that's needed. Obviously, it's really great that it's happening on the continent of Africa again for the first time in several years. What sort of developments would you like to see coming out of that and beyond?
Yes, I am hugely excited about COP27. I mean, I think I mentioned it already twice. You can tell I think this is hugely urgent. I really do feel
you're doing your job. Advocating.
Yeah, no, definitely. This is just such an urgent agenda. We need accelerated action on climate. We need accelerated action on circular economy. We need working across governments and across the finance sector to do that. And I think what was hugely exciting about COP26 when I was up in Glasgow is how many financial firms were there making commitments to align their portfolios to net zero by 2050. And so what needs to come afterwards is actually finding the investable opportunities to do that. And I think particularly with circular economy, we can even more strongly make the link between mitigation and circular economy business models. And Lindsay, it's something that you mentioned earlier, but I think we can more strongly do that so that this climate finance capital, which needs to increase much more than it already is flowing, but is flowing into circular economy business models. Good progress has been made on that already. So the 2020 MDB climate finance methodology, which is what BII uses, has circular economy models much more strongly than it did in 2019. And this is, hugely helping us. And so I'm seeing a lot of promise in this space, but I think we could do more so. And then I think this is something that's very pertinent to Sanergy as well. But really, how do we explain the impact of these circular economy models in terms of greenhouse gas emissions avoided? And what can that do to mean that we can link into the carbon finance market to grow that opportunity, which I think, Lindsay, maybe that's something you want to speak about as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think there are a lot of good things that I hopefully can, and excited to see hopefully come out of COP27. But yes, in particular, look forward to, just as you were starting to say, on discussion around increasing and democratizing climate financing for these companies, for circular economy companies, particularly in emerging markets, to really help build the community resilience and drive the impact here. Circular economy models like Sanergy can be a significant driver of emissions reductions. Just like you said earlier, that again, underappreciated the impact of the emissions impact of like production of things, of tangible things, and especially, and in this case, even includes just sanitation provision, actually, in the traditional methods has very high emissions impact. So carbon finance can play a big role in scaling circular economy models across the continent here in Africa. So as you said, Lindsay, it's great to see that COP27 will be back here on the continent. I think most of the existing methodologies, unfortunately, for quantifying and verifying emissions reductions in circular economy models, like waste treatment or sanitation, as I know best, were created for a developed country context, and they don't accommodate the more unique baseline situation that we face. So for example, here, pit latrines and dump sites, different baseline than what you're measuring against for how these methodologies work and calculate emissions reductions in other economies. And they also don't really accommodate the unique solution options that we have as well. So there's none, for example, right now that include black soldier fly production in any sort of sanitation or waste management carbon reduction work. So that's something that we are working on, and I would love to just see increased focus on how to make it easier to correctly calculate and acknowledge and monetize the value that is being created in emissions reductions by circular economy approaches.
Thank you. If anyone can see me waving my arms around, it's because we've got a resource-efficient building and the lights keep going off. Now I'm going to move on to the audience Q&A, and we had several questions flowing through, and I think there's quite a few for you, Lindsay. The first one that I'd like to ask is this question that's come through about when and how did you engage with communities when designing your products? How did that work and delivering the business? And did you face any challenges?
Yes, great question. I think it is very key, and we did that from the beginning. So before we really launched, so while we were, if you're here in the beginning of the call, Lindsay noted we started while my co-founders and I were graduate students at MIT. And so even while we were in graduate school, sort of initially had this idea, but almost immediately went to the field, came to Nairobi, saw what people were already doing and sort of tried our ideas on them. And this was all the, in the informal settlements, people who were operating public toilets or people who didn't have access to good toilets, getting initial feedback, literally doing co-design with them of what a great sanitation facility would look like. And then we had a couple of initial prototypes operating for the first year before we actually started, so sort of year zero. That were, we didn't have all the aspects, so as we've just talked about here in a circular economy approach, there's a lot. And I think one thing that we did was acknowledge we can't start everything all at once. And so we actually started with that customer on the sanitation side initially of how do we make sure that we're designing facilities and services that are going to be valued and solve that customer's problem. Knowing in this case that certainly you can compost waste to make fertilizer. Like we knew that was technically possible. We didn't feel like that was where we needed to start in terms of testing and learning. I'd say almost as quickly we then started working with farmers to understand whether they would use this organic fertilizer. And as we've discussed, learned very quickly that theoretically totally happy with it. There were no there was not significant hesitation to use fertilizer derived from human waste and other organic residuals, but that it required a lot of support to help people know how to do so appropriately. So short answer, from the very beginning, started working with informal settlements residents on the one hand and farmers on the other hand to make sure that the products and services were really optimized to meet their problems as they saw them.
And that kind of neatly brings me on to the next question, which is from Adam in Uganda. He works for a social enterprise, and he's quite interested in the connections that you're making today. Are you working with other social enterprises across the region? Are you incubating skills, or are there things that you could be doing to help, or are doing to help other countries and other communities facing similar challenges with their waste?
Yeah, no, that is a great question. I mean, I think so. We do work. Part of why we were able to, one of the many reasons why we were attracted to work here in Nairobi, and then more broadly from there, kind of expanding throughout Kenya and East Africa, is that it's very active social enterprise community. There's a lot of people that we owe huge debts of gratitude to for figuring out some of for having really hard-won learnings that we could apply more quickly. In everything from setting up the business to kind of even just our original networks of community leaders inside the communities where we work. So I think it is critical that we do the same. And so, we do try to work with partners where that makes sense. I think one thing we have learned some of our early days, we said, oh, we can try to, you work in the communities that we do, either in urban informal settlements or in sort of under-resourced farming communities in some cases, and you can see very many problems. I do think there can be a risk to trying to suddenly say like, oh, how do I help? How can I adapt the model to solve even more problems? And as it is, our model is already kind of long and big and complex enough. So we did go through a couple of growing pains where we tried to broaden, for example, into more school hygiene and education and things like this, which are related, or menstrual hygiene advocacy and support, again related, but realized that wasn't kind of driving more impact through the whole. So since then, have shifted, instead of trying to solve more of those problems ourselves, how do we connect our communities to great organizations doing that work, serving these same communities, and supporting some of those. For example, there's a relatively new startup here in Nairobi called Mama Toto, which is working on diapers and trying to do a full circular economy approach to cloth diapers and waste management from cloth diapers. And initially she said, maybe we can partner together, and I was tempted and realized that actually what we could do much more effectively was create the opportunity for some of my colleagues to support her, give her ideas, give her introductions, and kind of be advisors along the way. And I think that's been really effective. So we've tried to do more of that.
Thank you. Ellen, there have been a couple of questions about investment and the willingness. Is there a willingness to invest significant dollars into surfacing circular economy ideas? I guess that's an interesting question from both the general investment community and the DFI community. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Lindsay, is that more about sort of early stage innovation? How
that's how I read it, yeah. It's just surfacing those solutions. So I guess that's where there's usually the biggest gap in any business startup, is right at that beginning.
Yeah, definitely. So I think this is hugely important for all climate tech or climate positive business models, that there's more innovation needed, and there's innovation, not only is innovation needed, but actually support needed to scale those businesses. And I think I was hugely happy and pleased to hear about the Earthshot Prize and how that's supporting the finalists, because I think that's absolutely the kind of things that need to happen. And so British International Investments is looking into how we do this for climate entrepreneurs. Our best example, actually not in circular economy, it's in adaptation and resilience. And I saw there was another question around yeah, so we're absolutely focused on supporting mitigation, a just transition, and adaptation resilience as our three pillars of our Paris alignment strategy. Circular economy, I think, fits best under mitigation, but obviously has adaptation and resilience co-benefits. And so a program that we partnered with Climate Kick on for early stage innovation was focused around adaptation and resilience. It was running a program to select sort of the best adaptation and resilience startups and support those founders to go from idea to a business that was mature enough to start fundraising. And then what we're doing now is like working with those startups to help introduce them to sort of the early VC ecosystem. And then hopefully those businesses are going to go on to mature to a point at which BII will invest, which is a little bit later down that sort of maturity curve, but it's certainly something that through our technical assistance funding we're supporting. And so our other London Climate Action Week event that's open to the public tomorrow is going to dive into more of that. So if that is something you're interested in, I'm going to plug that now. So you can find the details on our website and on the London Climate Action Week website as well.
And how can you engage young Africans to create business? I know there's something that we've been focusing on ourselves, that we don't just want to have companies that are based in the West coming up with all of these ideas, or getting the opportunity to have their ideas taken forward. How are we thinking about that in terms of engaging with the ecosystem in markets?
Oh, I mean, it's just so important. That is the most crucial thing. This Climate Kick partnership has ran the competition across the markets that BII invests in, so across Africa and South Asia, and they have brilliant networks within within country, much better than we do, because we're predominantly London-based with colleagues in market, but still our HQ is here. So we absolutely must partner with organisations that have strong networks on the ground, because it is in-country founders who are bringing forward these ideas and understand market context, and it's particularly through gender and diversity lens investing. It's absolute that those kind of founders we want to back. So it's integral to the way that we think about investing and the way that we design the strategic program style support that we offer as well.
Thank you. We're nearly running out of time. I'm going to ask you a very, very quick question, Ellen, and then I'm going to return to Lindsay. Quick question that's come in. Does circular mean the same as sustainable?
Great question. I would say they're related, but they're not interchangeable. And this idea of circularity is additive. It goes beyond some resource efficiency, some energy efficiency you might do, to this like radical and exciting and transformational idea of cycling the hard materials or the organic materials back and preventing waste and using them again and again and again. So it's a route to achieving sustainability.
Thank you. Lindsay, one of the questions we've got here, which I think is probably going to be the last question we have time for, is just this interest, an interest in the potential value of the circular economy. I think you mentioned what the potential value was, and there's an interest in just how that's made up, and actually how we can start thinking about that from the perspective of the tensions that many SMEs feel between ESG requirements and trying to get their business going. And obviously this idea that if you can participate in the circular economy, you potentially remove some of those tensions. Could you just explain a little bit more about your thinking there?
Yeah. I mean, so indeed, the figure I did mention before, that one of the studies we've looked at, and to be honest, I don't have it offhand, so I can't offer the citation just now, but I can follow up with that. It is $4.5 trillion, and so I think this is looking at it in a number of ways. So a lot of that is right now where we're sort of like throwing away value, where we see waste as waste, as opposed to kind of capturing the nutrient or energy, et cetera, other values from that. And then along the way, obviously, there's a tremendous economic benefits. You're not just eliminating that wasted resource, but thereby creating green jobs, as we talked about before, and creating, in our case, for example, products and services that sort of empower other businesses to thrive more. So by, in our case, again, producing fertilizer and animal feed and briquettes, these are all essentially tools that enhance other businesses' economic value generation. So that figure that I quoted is much more of like kind of broader economic impact. I think the question here also is looking at how do you, as a business starting up, how do you make the costs of kind of the additional investment or possibly R&D that's needed? How do you balance that against the benefits that you're creating? And it's a great question. I think it gets back to a lot of the things we talked about here today, that basically that, in a circular approach, we are generally creating public goods, or we are, creating positive externalities that we are not currently monetizing very well. And so I think that DFIs and other investors can play a key role in bringing capital and sort of knowing that there's, you're investing in that additional impact, even if it's not being priced in, as Ellen was talking about before. And then I also think that you need to make sure that the additional financing streams like carbon finance is more readily available, so that we can capture the monetary value of those positive externalities that are created through a circular approach.
Yeah, and I mean, it strikes me as well that some of the things you talked about, both you and Ellen, about tax incentives, penalising other forms of business, are going to be a key part of changing the incentive structures here.
Exactly, evening the playing field a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think of Ellen when that this is happening. We need to respond to it, and at some point we've got to get to a point where we recognise the value of changing our practice to protect the planet. Lindsay, if I can finish on you, is there, reflecting on today's conversation, what would be your final advice to investors or to DFIs looking to enter this space or looking to do more?
Yeah, I think, some connected to themes we've talked about, but I think it is worth putting a finer point on this, seeing that circular economy businesses are significantly more capital intensive compared to other hot sectors, as I mentioned, say fintech, or other more kind of IT-based hot investment sectors. So they do require real partnership with governments too. So which comes at a cost to kind of develop those relationships. So for investors, what that means is that to really take a blended finance approach, so designed for the risk and quantum of capital needed to build a circular economy businesses at each stage of their growth. So it needs to be a little bit more nuanced. Also, investors need to deploy that capital directly to the private sector rather than via government mediated programs. And I appreciate what Ellen's saying on the TA support. I think that is right. I think, in our case, we know what are the regulatory changes that need to happen to empower this, rather than trying to kind of fund, to the government to kind of make those changes. Larger investors, especially like DFIs, can at the same time support country governments by encouraging them and holding them accountable to passing the legislation, the policies, and then enforcing those as needed to incentivize circular economy models. So I think investors really play a key part in all of those steps.
Wonderful, thank you. And it just leaves me to thank both you, Lindsay, and Ellen, for your insight and wisdom today, and sharing your views on both the economic and the climate opportunities that there is here, from moving from a take, make, waste model to this sort of reduce, reuse, recycle. And of course, I'd like to thank you all, our audience, for joining us and asking questions. We'll be making a recording available as usual, which we'll be sending out. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you again, Lindsay and Ellen. Bye-bye, everyone.